I wanted to take a moment to introduce Rip Rapson. He's been a local leader as a public servant. He's been a national thought leader, both as a funder and as an author. He is the president of the Kresge Foundation, under whom he has been such a force for improvements to the economic, social, cultural, and environmental conditions of urban life nationally and here in Detroit. We're so grateful for his continued support to Grantmakers in the Arts and his support for this conference. President and CEO of the Kresge Foundation, Rip Rapson.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Eddie. Could someone please remind me next time not to agree to talk after an Oakland poet? I mean, that was really quite something. It's just a real pleasure to have you all in Detroit. I hope your time here has made it clear how vitally central arts and culture have been to resetting the trajectory of this city. But I did want to expand the aperture just a bit this morning to say a word about the importance of arts and culture in helping us navigate our current national circumstance. In the immediate hours after last November's election, I wrote about the hope felt by so many of us that the vulgarity, the bombastic certitude, and the mean-spiritedness of the campaign season would yield to a rational consistency of governance norms across party lines, across systems of belief, and across idiosyncratic temperaments. Well, things didn't quite work out that way. We have instead been catapulted into an existential crisis that forces each of us to look inward, to excavate the unalterable bedrock of our values, of our faith, of what we stand for. And each one of you in this room does exactly that, every hour of every day, valorizing an abiding belief that our every action must reflect what we believe to be good and true and just. That is what it means to be a mission-driven organization. Indeed, philanthropy's privileged position in society carries with it an elevated responsibility to ensure that there is no confusion or equivocation about what we stand for. So I wanted to set out as clearly as I can what the Kresge Foundation stands for. We stand for the animating energies of the pursuit of truth, not for the fealty to the indefensible and depreciation of reasoned discourse. We stand for opportunity structures that dismantle and substitute for the persistent and pervasive social, economic, racial, and political barriers that so shamefully impede pathways to equality and justice, not for the enshrinement of those barriers in public policy, in the perpetuation of racial and ethnic division, and in the corrosion of compassion for the least fortunate among us. We stand for the principled stewardship of our shared destiny and the promotion of structures of mutual support, not for the legitimization of a malevolent machinery of feigned and nonstop outrage and vilification that undermines confidence in our most fundamental democratic institutions. We stand for the power of a creative problem solving that calls on community wisdom, intergenerational exchange, and respect for difference, not for the false comfort of facile judgments and rhetorical hyperbole about complex, interbraided problems. We stand for the embrace and ennoblement of every individual's inherent dignity, worth, and decency, not for a denigration and demonization of those whose skin pigment, physical conditions, sexual orientation, or faith differs from our own. And we stand for an abiding optimism about the perfectibility of the human spirit and the power of faith and grace and beauty, not for the dismal brew of a calculating and cruel cynicism placed in service of an unyielding pursuit of self-advancement. Those are our values. They don't need to be everyone's. But for all of us, in one degree or another, the question is what we do when what we stand for comes under assault. Garrison Keillor, the Hewlett Laureate of Lake Wobegon, took one option off the table. lacerating the idea that those who felt aggrieved by last November's election could simply wait matters out. The government is in someone else's hands, Keeler wrote. Let them build the wall and carry on the trade war with China and deport the undocumented and deal with the opioids. We, by which I mean librarians, children's authors, yoga practitioners, Unitarians, bird watchers, people who keep book on their shelves, that bunch, can go for a long, brisk walk and smell the roses. The acidity of Keeler's irony underscores the point. The ethical imperative of action is searing. This country is so rich in aspiration and yet so big and sloppy and diverse in every other possible way that there is room in the interstices of even the most deleterious policies, dehumanizing rhetoric, decimated regulations, and dismantled programs for Americans of every walk of life to build in the unappreciated silhouettes of marginalized communities the spark that makes light. But how? I want to suggest 3 principles that seem paramount in understanding how arts and culture might help. First, we must bear witness. It's understandable for community workers, nonprofit organizations, and philanthropists to question whether their voices matter in an environment saturated with information chaff, insomnia-induced tweets, bot-distributed misinformation, and troll-generated diversionary feints, all intended to lock our attention onto bits of data, alternative facts, and other intellectual flotsam and jetsam that obscure the real issues of the day. But these voices do matter enormously, and the arts are powerful instruments of creative amplification. The arts casts our values in bright relief, providing unequivocal compass toward the North Star of a just and humane society. They are needed to tell the stories of ordinary people working in dignity to improve the economic, social, and political conditions of community life. They're needed to jolt people out of a sense of defeatism about the inevitability of power structures smothering authenticity and conviction. They're needed to give us the courage to persevere. Second, we must fortify the vehicles to surface our courage. Because arts and culture can tap deep reservoirs of heritage, bridge across difference, and erect new platforms of civic participation and community agency, they can animate consummately democratic spaces such as libraries, community centers, parks, places of worship, even alleyways and abandoned railroad beds, creating places of safe harbor and physical, spiritual, and emotional support for threatened, disenfranchised, or otherwise deeply disempowered citizens. By its essence, moreover, artistic and cultural expression reinforces the broader civic membrane needed to hold acts of courage. Because the arts can interrupt our certitude by seeking to explain rather than to resolve. Because the arts can dislodge our inertias by drawing us outside ourselves to question the ways we see the world. Because the arts can substitute the unexpected and fresh for the conventional, insular, and safe. And because the arts can surface a vision of connection as an antidote to the democratic degeneration precipitated by apathy and indifference. Third, we need to forge alliances around the non-negotiable. In no time in my memory has it been more important for arts and culture to become part of a larger movement of social justice, helping strengthen the alliances necessary to speak and advance those truths of equity, fairness, and justice that we know to be inviolable. That climate change is a social justice issue. That unequal educational attainment is an injustice no civilized society can tolerate. That health disparities driven by social, economic, and environmental deprivation undermine the best intentions of our public health system. That no neighborhood resident in the city of Detroit, or any city for that matter, should have to cope with entire blocks of blight, neglected and unusable public parks and community centers, corner convenience stores substituting soda and chips for fresh food. That an effective and affordable local and regional public transit system is prerequisite to getting and holding a job. We are all interwoven into what Dr. Martin Luther King called the inescapable network of mutuality. That means that institutions like Kresge have to invest generously and without hesitation in ensuring that individuals, organizations, and movements possess the tools they need to organize and mobilize, to educate and advocate, to rebuild the sinews of social capital and strengthen the musculature of citizen-based problem solving. Our conceptions of risk and safety are sliding like sand from out beneath us. Acts that were once risky are now elementary and insufficient. Fundamental democratic norms that were once safe are too often trivialized as transitory, relative, or out of touch. I choose, however, to view this moment as an inflection point, not a new stasis. It is a call to reassessment, recalibration, recommitment. The nonprofit and philanthropic sectors have spent decades trying to create and assemble the building blocks of opportunity and justice. That architecture is woefully incomplete, to be sure, but it is an architecture at once complex, dynamic, and resilient. Our charge is to continue fitting together those building blocks in a coherent, inclusive, impactful way. This is no time to put down our trowels and our mortar. We need to keep building and rebuilding, even when the building inspector tells us we don't have a permit, and even when the demolition crew drives onto the site. Sorry to be trite with the metaphor, but my father was an architect and a planner, and in this climate, I think we all need to be. So thank you for listening. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. On a slightly more hopeful note, it is my deep, deep pleasure to introduce a treasure of our community. Afet Dworkin has been with Sphinx for, I think, as long as Sphinx has been with us. And she, as you probably all know by now, has created a set of programs, a set of activities, and a presence in our community that has been inspiring Detroiters for a very, very long time. So I'm delighted to introduce Afa, and she'll in turn introduce the Sphinx Virtuoso.